I think I would feel comfortable counting an octopus as intelligent.
But not the pig.
Well, I think
Or a raven.
it has to be.
Dolphins.
Oh man, you're getting me. Hey crazies, welcome to another installment of Wife Reacts. This is my wife, Awkward M.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about the Fermi Paradox. All right, so as usual, let's start with what do you know? What do you know about the Fermi Paradox?
Aliens.
Aliens.
It's aliens, right? Something about there's so much universe. Why statistically there should be aliens? Why haven't we seen them? Yes?
Right. So the Fermi Paradox started in 1950-ish at Los Alamos National Lab. There were these four guys sitting at a table.
Mm-hmm.
Four physicists.
Naturally.
Yes. So we've got Enrico Fermi, who technically I think it's pronounced Fermi, but it's gonna be it's an uphill battle for me.
You'll try your best.
Yes. And then there's Emil Konopinski, Edward Teller, and Herbert York. They're all having this casual lunch at Los Alamos.
Okay.
And then, out of nowhere, Fermi just blurts out, "Don't you wonder where they all are?" If these other three guys weren't his friends and coworkers, they'd have no idea what he was talking about. But they were able to basically infer that he was talking about aliens.
Let's be honest, we all have that friend, am I right?
Yeah. And then no one really thought anything of it after that. In fact, Fermi ended up dying 4 years later. At the time of his death, it was just this casual conversation he had with some friends. And then turns out that those friends would continue to discuss this philosophical debate, and it would eventually become known as the Fermi Paradox. This actual conversation was sort of like a physics urban legend.
Okay.
For a while, no one knew if it was actually true.
Well, sure. Why would it have been recorded or written down or?
Right. You know, just a bunch of friends having a casual conversation. Mm-hmm. It wasn't actually substantiated until like the mid-1980s. Some other guy at Los Alamos was like, you know, this supposedly happened here. I wonder if this is actually true. And so went through the trouble of calling up the other guys at the lunch. And at that point, they're super old, you know, but they remembered the conversation and they told him when it happened and everything. And so it did actually happen and it ended up being a real story.
Interesting. Also, be careful what you say, kids. Might come back up 35 years later.
Right. But with that in mind, the paradox sort of hinges on two assumptions.
Okay. Always with the assumptions
Yes.
in physics.
Well, you have to make some, you can't go off of nothing, right?
Sure.
The two assumptions are...
The cow is round. No, just kidding.
Yeah, we're at spherical cows and cubic chickens, and it's nothing that crazy. The two assumptions for the Fermi Paradox are that there are many intelligent species in the universe.
Okay.
And two, we should have been able to detect them by now.
Okay.
It's a paradox because when we look out into the universe, we don't hear anything. We don't see any evidence of their existence.
Right.
It's like any paradox, we need a solution. Also, just like any paradox, it comes down to those assumptions. One of them must be wrong.
Right.
Either there aren't that many intelligent species, or we shouldn't expect ourselves to be able to detect them.
Okay. Which I'm sure that we will get into.
Right. What I want to do today is I want to focus on the first assumption. Why do we think that? Why do we think that there are many intelligent species in the universe?
Okay.
During Fermi's time, that was more of just wishful thinking, I guess. No one had really sat down and done any actual calculations.
But it sounds like they have since been done.
Yes. Around 1961, there was this guy by the name of Frank Drake.
Okay. I see where this is going.
Yes. So I have a nice little visual aid for you.
Ooh, thank you.
It's just a bunch of factors multiplied together.
I see that.
Ultimately, what this does is it gives us the number of communicating intelligent species in the galaxy. So right off the bat.
In our galaxy.
Right.
Not in the universe.
Right.
Okay.
The first three numbers, the R, the FP, and the NE, we actually know pretty well.
Okay.
if we're analyzing that first assumption in the Fermi paradox, that there are many intelligent species, then it's going to come down to these last 4 numbers.
Okay.
Specifically FL, FI, and L.
Okay.
The second to last, the FC, is about communication, and so that's about detectability, and that's more related to the second assumption.
Okay.
And so the other 3, FL, FI, and L, are where we have a little wiggle room, where we don't really have a lot of data. We basically have one data point, Earth. And so this is where we get to make very subjective judgments
Right.
about how this equation is going to turn out.
I just feel the need to get it off my chest is that I feel like something that this does not take into account is that we are assuming that all life is going to be like us. And honestly, I mean, you have to, because what you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
But I just feel like it needs to be said that there could be life out there. It's just so different from us that we don't know it or understand it or see it.
Right. And I feel like as we go forward with this, you're going to have a lot of things to say being a biologist.
Okay.
When it comes to these 3 factors, the solution to the Fermi paradox would mean that one of these numbers is extremely small, much smaller than we're actually anticipating.
Okay.
Much smaller than our heart would like, I guess.
Oh.
As we can see here, FL is the fraction of those habitable planets that do end up having life on them. FI is how many of those planets with life on them evolve intelligent life. L is the length of time that species can communicate with us, called the lifetime factor
Okay.
in years. All you can really say about that L is that it's the length of time that species communicates, or at least is detectable by human means.
Okay, but so we're talking about the group and not an individual. That's
Correct.
my question. Okay.
Right.
Not the entire, start to finish for the species, because they're not necessarily communicating for that whole time, like you were saying.
Right. These 3 factors fall under one big umbrella, something we call the Great Filter.
Okay.
As life evolves and as an intelligent species grows, biologically or technologically, there will be some kind of filter that stops them from going any farther, or stops most species from going any farther, at least. And so we call it the Great Filter. There is some big insurmountable obstacle that is keeping the number of species low.
Okay.
Starting with the first factor here, FL, the fraction of those habitable worlds that actually have life on them.
Not intelligent life.
Just life.
Any life.
Bacterial is fine.
Okay.
Early Earth history was sort of defined by something we call the heavy bombardment, right? The whole solar system was full of a bunch of rocks.
It was tumultuous.
Yeah, it was a bad time.
It was.
The surface of the Earth was basically like
Molten.
lava. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we know sort of when that heavy bombardment ended. And at that time, there was already life existing on Earth.
Right.
And so somehow life was existing at least near the end of the heavy bombardment period, which is wild.
As soon as it was possible.
Yes.
It was like, bing, I'm here.
I personally put a 1 or 100% in for FL. If life is possible, it exists on that world.
I think the real question is what happened here typical or not? And it's another one of those things that we don't know.
Right.
And so I understand why, you can make that assumption, because in the absence of information, go with what you know, right? But I do feel like it's worth noting we could be the exception
Right.
and not the rule.
Even though here life began the moment it could, that could be unusual.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Right. It could turn out that Earth-like worlds with life are extremely rare.
Right.
And we're making we're making a statistical judgment on one data point. We shouldn't be.
Not that we shouldn't be, because again, it's not like we have more data, or
Right.
that we are able to collect more data and we have chosen not to. There's just not the data out there.
Right. It's not available.
And so you have to make some assumptions, like we said earlier, and you either have to assume it is common and what we did is normal, or it's not common. And I feel like you are telling me that both sides have been taken into account with different hypotheses.
While I personally would put a 1 in for this factor, other people wouldn't. And given the data set that we have, that is also a valid answer.
Exactly.
Where I would personally put a great filter is in the next factor.
Okay.
This is the fraction of life-bearing planets that would evolve into an intelligent species. In fact, that particular subcategory of the great filters, it's considered the rare Earth hypothesis.
Because that's tough, man.
We know that at the moment life was possible, life began, but we're talking super simple bacterial life. What we call prokaryotes?
Prokaryotes.
No atomic nucleus. I would hope there's an atomic nucleus. No cell nucleus, just a container of stuff.
Single cellular.
Yes, single cellular life. Also on Earth, though, that was basically all life was for a very long time.
For so long that I don't think our brains appropriately appreciate how long it was.
Speaking of that, actually, now that you bring that up, I'm going to try to talk about these numbers instead of billions of years. Let's try to talk about them in terms of something I did in a previous video where it was galactic years.
Okay.
And so that's the amount of time it takes the sun to go around the center of the galaxy. It's about
Okay.
230 million Earth years is one galactic year. And this should help make the numbers more comprehensible.
Okay.
Earth formed 20 galactic years ago. So Earth has only gone around the galaxy 20 times.
I mean, it's quite a hike, though, so.
Right,
I'll
it
give
is.
to
It's a very long hike.
Sorry. Almost legal drinking age.
Right. Life began somewhere between 16 and a half and 17 and a half galactic years ago. So it took a few galactic years for that heavy bombardment period to end. It was
Right.
it was a while. Eukaryotic life, that's life with a cell nucleus, that didn't evolve for another 8 galactic years.
Which is just so long.
During those 8 galactic years in there, we're talking billions of years. During those 8 galactic years, life on Earth was just prokaryotic life. It was just a bunch of bacteria.
It was very successful.
They just hung out and they were doing their thing. They were just fine. And then a couple of them decided that they were gonna work together, and then boom, eukaryotic life. And then, if I'm understanding this
A couple
correctly,
of them decided that they were going to work together. Nothing like anthropomorphizing your bacteria.
yeah, they just happened to stumble into this mutually beneficial relationship.
I'll accept it.
Okay, thank you for the correction.
People think that things do things on purpose
Yeah.
much more than they do.
Right, we are way a long way from brains here.
Right.
We're still talking single cells.
How many galactic years are there in between the first eukaryotic cell and the first multicellular organism?
A lot.
A lot of galactic years?
A lot of galactic years. The eukaryotic cell was 2 billion years ago, right? So we're talking 8.7 galactic years ago.
Okay, so something that I always struggle with is talking about years ago and then years since.
Right. It was about halfway.
Okay.
Eukaryotic cells were about halfway.
Okay.
And so it was 8 galactic years from the beginning and 8 galactic years ago-ish,
Okay.
which is a long time
Yes, very long.
to go from single-celled eukaryotes to multicellular organisms was another 5 galactic years.
So many.
Once life began, it took 8 galactic years for eukaryotes to show up,
Okay.
and then another 5 for multicellular organisms. It took another 5 galactic years for multiple cells to start working together as one organism.
Yeah.
These transitions seem to be a lot harder
Yes.
than just life beginning as prokaryotes.
Absolutely. Well, because when you become a multicellular organism, it now means that each one of the individual cells, that there are some of those that can no longer survive on their own outside of the organism.
Right.
Because there were colonies. A colony is just a group of cells that they're better off living together than living apart. But if one of them gets kicked out, he's gonna make it. And
Right.
once you become a multicellular organism, you can't do that anymore. You all have to be together or else.
Yeah, or you're dead.
Yeah. And so it's a big step.
All of the complexity that we see on Earth today, well, all the animals and all the plants and fungus and all that stuff, all of that happened in the last 800 million years, in the last 3.5 galactic years, right? So the last 3.5 times the sun has gone around the galaxy.
It's been busy.
Yeah. And so huge growth after that. That was a very successful transition. Now, eventually, intelligent species evolved. I think it's arrogant to think we're the only ones. You know, there were plenty of other closely related species that were around on Earth that I would feel very comfortable saying are intelligent.
Such as, I'm just not sure what you're
Such
implying.
as Neanderthals.
Okay.
They may not have reached our technological advancement, but they were certainly an intelligent species.
I think the interesting question is, do we have to stick with the hominins in order to talk about intelligent species?
Ooh. You're talking like an octopus.
Like an octopus.
Yeah.
They were very early on, evolutionarily speaking, when you're looking at like animals, you know what I mean?
A totally independent evolution of intelligence.
That's what I'm asking.
Very different intelligence than we have.
Right.
You need to be not too restrictive of what you mean by intelligence.
Okay. So if we were looking at a different planet in a different solar system and we saw something like an octopus or like a pig, right, which are also intelligent, yes, we would count that as intelligent life. Or is it just up to the scientists that you happen to be speaking to?
It's subjective, and you know that always any of these values come with biases.
Right.
There's always biases.
Uh-huh.
I think I would feel comfortable counting an octopus as intelligent.
But not the pig?
Well, I think
Or a raven?
it has to be.
Dolphins.
Oh man, you're getting me. I'm trying to think about what the spirit of this equation is. Like, what does the word intelligence mean in relation to this equation?
And that's the question I'm asking.
Right, and I think it means that this species could develop into something that is detectable. It doesn't mean they are detectable eventually, but it means they could.
The species can develop into something that is capable of communicating with us and therefore becoming detectable? Is that what you mean?
Right, well, I mean, detectable, Frank Drake's original idea behind this was that it was radio, right? That they would eventually develop radio signals that could travel out into space. We have to kind of decide, like, well, are any of these obstacles that Earth has run into in the past, are those the Great Filter and we're through it? We're safe now? We're the ones that made it?
Right.
Are we the first species, the first species to survive the Great Filter?
In the galaxy?
In the galaxy. So far, we've been assuming that the Great Filter is in our past.
Right.
That is not necessarily the case.
There may be in the future.
Yeah, there may be some insurmountable obstacle that we can't even fathom that is in the future.
We can fathom.
Right, or we're living it right now.
Looking at you, climate change.
Yeah, climate change is a possibility. Nuclear war is a possibility.
Yeah. I feel like Star Trek has given us many options over the years, over the series.
There are a lot of ways a species could just suddenly end. They weren't prepared for a change or whatever. So
I think I'm leaning into they could absolutely be out there, and the hurdles are just too big. The detection hurdles and the signal hurdles. I'm happy with there being 90 out there or whatever.
Right. And so like that's the point. Like even if you set some of these values, these ones that we have freedom with, you say, oh well, there's this great filter that's gonna make one of those numbers really small. The number is still not small.
Right.
In the end, right? We're talking on the order of 100 species in the Milky Way galaxy, just our galaxy.
Right.
In order to get the final value, the number of species to be small, like one per galaxy or per universe, you would have to go really, really small on one of these numbers.
It's definitely a possibility, but it does not feel like the most likely possibility, going really, really, really small with those numbers.
Right. While I say that, like, if there's a great filter, I think that it's eukaryotic cells. I don't actually think the great filter is the solution to the paradox.
Okay.
I think we shouldn't be so arrogant to think we could detect them.
I do too. I think that's really the issue here.
Yeah. On that note, I did take a poll in various places. I did the community tab and Twitter and Facebook and stuff. 47% of you think that the great filter is the solution to the Fermi paradox and that filter is ahead of us.
Sorry. Dang! You guys are rough.
47% of voters think that we're not gonna make it, basically.
Bummer.
And that's just sad. That
That is
sucks.
sad.
Y'all are pretty depressing is the main takeaway there.
You're bringing us down, okay?
I guess in the comments, tell us what you think the solution to the Fermi paradox is. There has to be a solution. One of those assumptions has to be wrong. Which one do you think it is? Thanks for liking and sharing this video. A special thanks goes out to all my Patreon patrons and YouTube members for all their generous support. And until next time, remember,
It's okay to be a little crazy.
2 sunsets in a single day? Don't you mean a single year? Nope, I meant exactly what I said. On Mercury, the sun actually dips below the horizon in a false sunset, only to come back up for a bit and then go back down again in a true sunset. Anyway, thanks for watching.